I'm pregnant with another man's baby, and you're going to raise it. Those were the exact words Clara whispered across the dinner table to her husband, David Carter, the kindest, most respected tech magnate in Dallas. She thought she'd broken him. She thought she'd won. The cruel words she spoke froze the air inside the Carter residence that warm Dallas evening. David Carter, a man whose kindness had built both a company and a marriage, sat across the oak dining table staring at the woman he once believed was his life's calm harbor. Clara said it without hesitation, without tremor, almost like a business statement, as if betrayal had become another item on the agenda of her day. But for David Carter, a loyal husband, a self-made tech entrepreneur, and a man whose entire life revolved around kindness, that night wasn't an ending. It was ignition. The woman he once called his peace, Clara, didn't whisper those words in guilt. She delivered them like a verdict, confident that her husband's love would chain him forever. She believed his heart was too soft, his principles too noble, his forgiveness too predictable. She didn't realize the man she'd just humiliated had quietly built an empire not only of wealth, but of patience, precision, and secrets. For years, David's kindness had been her shelter. He'd carried her debts, her dreams, and her mother's hospital bills. But while he built a future out of faith, Clara built an illusion out of lies, one that began the night she met his business rival, Ryan Blake, a man whose handshake concealed an affair and whose smile hid a plan. And yet, what truly haunts this story isn't the betrayal, it's what came next. Because when love is betrayed by deceit, kindness doesn't vanish, it evolves. David didn't yell. He didn't throw her out. He simply looked into her eyes, nodded once, and said, "You've just rewritten our entire story." But what Clara didn't know was that the husband she mocked for being too gentle to fight was already preparing 7 layers of revenge, each colder, sharper, and more devastating than the last. As the Dallas skyline glittered outside their glass walls that night, a war of silence began, a war that would stretch from boardrooms to courtrooms, from whispered confessions to televised humiliation. He would smile through her affair, protect her reputation in public, and love their children like they were his, until the moment he chose to reveal the truth. And when that moment came, it wouldn't just break her world, it would erase her from it. Because sometimes the most dangerous revenge doesn't arrive with fury, it arrives with calm. And sometimes the kindest man in the room is the one you should have feared most. Viewers, imagine your spouse looking you in the eye and saying those words, "I'm pregnant with another man's baby, and you're going to raise it." What would you do? Walk away or stay long enough to make the betrayal unforgettable? For 10 years, David had built his empire, Carter Innovations, from the ground up, a tech manufacturing firm known across Texas for sustainable energy tools. And through it all, he credited Clara for his peace. He once told colleagues she was the quiet rhythm that steadies my storms. But that night, under the chandelier they'd bought together after their first IPO celebration, every illusion of love shattered like thin glass. He didn't shout. He didn't even blink. The fork slipped from his hand, and the only sound that followed was the faint clatter of metal against porcelain. In his mind replayed the mornings she'd kissed him before work, the way she'd rest her head on his chest during Sunday rainstorms, and the small, simple trust he'd built his entire identity upon. "Why?" he finally whispered. Clara leaned back, swirling the wine she hadn't earned. "Because I deserve more than kindness," she said. "Ryan gives me what you can't. Passion, vision. He understands me." Ryan Blake. The name felt like fire in David's chest. His business rival. The man he'd once invited into his boardroom to negotiate a merger. The same man who toasted him at his father's funeral last year. But Clara wasn't finished. "I know what you're thinking, David. Divorce, scandal, custody. But let me be clear. You're going to raise this baby. You'll make sure it has your last name. That's what a good man does, right? Isn't kindness your favorite weakness?" She smiled, the kind of smile that once made him believe in forever. Now it looked cruel, rehearsed, almost demonic in its composure. Across the room, a framed photo of their children, Noah and Lily, stood beside the fireplace. They were laughing in the picture, both wearing the same matching blue shirts he'd bought on their family trip to Austin. A sudden chill ran through him, and for the first time in his life, David wondered if even they were his. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the Dallas sky, one of those slow, crawling storms that arrived without warning, and somewhere deep within him, something shifted. A silence heavier than rage, colder than grief. He looked at Clara, and with a calmness that terrified her, He said quietly, "You've just rewritten our entire story." But what Clara didn't know was that the man she thought too kind to fight was about to show her what 7 levels of revenge truly looked like. Before betrayal ever had a name, there was laughter. Dallas mornings where the air smelled of fresh coffee and new beginnings, where Clara would hum quietly in the kitchen while David packed school lunches for Noah and Lily. They'd built their home from nothing. 2 ambitious people with a shared dream and a belief that love, if nurtured well enough, could weather any storm. In those early years, David wasn't the powerful CEO the newspapers later celebrated. He was just a young engineer with big ideas and a heart too generous for his own good. He'd met Clara at a business pitch event in Houston. She was a marketing graduate interning for a logistics firm. She'd smiled nervously during her presentation, her hair falling over her eyes, and David remembered thinking, "There's someone who deserves stability." He offered her a job when Carter Innovations began, saying, "I can't pay much yet, but we'll build something worth it." She took the chance. Together, they worked late nights in a rented office space with flickering lights, dreaming of creating tools that could change the energy sector. When their first prototype failed, Clara cried. David held her and said, "Failures are just unpaid lessons." When the second one failed, he laughed, called it progress in disguise, and sold his car to keep their payroll running. She never forgot that gesture, or so he thought. The turning point came when their third design succeeded. Suddenly, Carter Innovations became a rising name. Investors called, reporters came. Their photos appeared in Texas Business Weekly under the headline, "The Couple Powering Tomorrow." That success turned David into a public figure, kind, composed, charitable. He began funding scholarships and community tech labs. People called him the humble millionaire. But beneath the applause, something subtle began to change in Clara. She grew quieter at events, her smile thinner, her gaze lingering longer on others who lived faster, glossier lives. David, blinded by gratitude, mistook her silence for humility. He didn't see the envy brewing each time a woman at a gala leaned in too close to compliment him. He didn't notice how she flinched whenever he said, "We built this together." When they moved into their glass-walled Dallas home overlooking White Rock Lake, David felt he had finally kept his promise to give her the world. But to Clara, the world he gave wasn't enough. She wanted attention, control, and the thrill of being desired beyond routine love. One evening after tucking in the kids, she stood by the window and whispered, "You've built a fortress of kindness, David. But do you even know what lives inside it?" He smiled, not understanding. He kissed her forehead and said, "Peace, Clara. Peace lives here." She smiled faintly, but behind her reflection, there was already a shadow taking shape. The day Ryan Blake entered David Carter's boardroom, the temperature in the room seemed to shift. Subtle, imperceptible, but real. He was everything corporate America adored. Sharp suits, sharper words, and the kind of confidence that seemed to bend every conversation in his favor. David had invited him to discuss a possible partnership. Carter Innovations needed distribution leverage, and Ryan's firm, Blake Dynamics, owned the supply networks across the Midwest. Clara was there too, seated at the far end of the conference table, her notebook open, but her eyes often drifting to Ryan. He noticed. Everyone did, even Marcus Hale, David's best friend and CFO, would later say, "You could feel the static in that room." David, as always, led with kindness. He spoke about collaboration, not competition, about shared growth, not greed. Ryan listened politely, then smiled in that calculating way of his. "Kindness is good, David," Ryan said, "but business isn't charity, it's chess." That line lingered in the air. David laughed softly, thinking it was a joke. Clara didn't. Something in Ryan's voice struck a chord, something dangerous and magnetic. The meeting ended with a handshake and a tentative agreement to explore a merger. As they walked out, Ryan lingered by the glass doors, turned to Clara and said, "You're the one behind Carter's brand image, aren't you? I've seen your campaigns. You make the company look alive." Clara smiled, a little too long. "It's a team effort," she said. "Sure," Ryan replied, his tone low and teasing, "but some teams shine because one player does all the heavy lifting." That night, while David drove home humming to an old country song, Clara replayed that line in her head. It wasn't love, just validation she hadn't felt in years. And when she walked into the house, the contrast hit harder. David was helping Noah with a science project, glue on his fingers, patience in his smile, kindness again, predictable, steady, boring. Over the next few months, Ryan became a fixture at their office. Business trips increased. Strategy meetings extended late into the night. Sometimes Clara volunteered to coordinate presentation drafts. Sometimes Ryan stayed behind to finalize numbers. Marcus began noticing. One evening after a long board meeting, he quietly told David, "You trust too easily, brother. Ryan's the kind of man who studies your softness before he strikes." David smiled. "Kindness isn't weakness, Marcus. It's clarity." But clarity was slipping away, slowly replaced by shadows. One weekend, David returned home from a charity conference early. The house was quiet. Clara said she was working late with the Blake Dynamics team, but when he glanced at her laptop left open on the dining table, he saw a message flash briefly before the screen dimmed. "Ryan, you left your earring in my car. Miss you already." David froze. His throat tightened, but he didn't react, not yet. He closed the laptop gently, as though sealing away a secret he wasn't ready to confront. Outside, the Dallas lights shimmered against the skyline. Inside, the foundation of a decade-long marriage began to crack. For months, David convinced himself he had imagined it. That message, "Ryan, you left your earring in my car," became a ghost he carried quietly, a whisper he couldn't erase but refused to confront. He told himself Clara was loyal, that stress and long hours distorted truth. He'd built his marriage on trust, and trust, he believed, deserved protection, even from suspicion. At work, the atmosphere had shifted. Ryan Blake's influence was everywhere. Policy adjustments, subtle redirections, new contract proposals that strangely favored Blake Dynamics. Clara championed each one, insisting they were strategic growth moves. Marcus Hale disagreed. "You're giving away control," he warned David in his office one morning, closing the blinds like he was sealing a secret. "Ryan's carving his way into Carter Innovations, one collaboration at a time." David leaned back in his chair, exhaustion in his voice. "He's our partner, Marcus. This merger keeps us scalable." Marcus sighed. "You're not hearing me. He's not merging businesses. He's merging lives, and your wife's right in the middle of it." David's silence stretched long. His hand drifted to his wedding band, twisting it unconsciously. "You think Clara would—" He couldn't finish. Saying it aloud would make it real. Meanwhile, Clara's distance was growing measurable. Dinners turned into texts, working late. Movie nights turned into excuses. "I'm exhausted. Maybe next week." Even their children noticed. Lily once asked during breakfast, "Mommy, why don't you laugh with Daddy anymore?" Clara smiled faintly and said, "Adults just get busy, honey." But David saw the change. The new perfume, the cold glances, the secretive phone calls that ended the moment he entered a room. He tried to restore normalcy. Flowers, surprise lunches, even canceling a board trip to stay home. Yet kindness, when met with deceit, becomes invisible. One evening, he walked into the living room to find Clara dressed elegantly, a suitcase by the door. "Another trip?" he asked, forcing calm. "Ryan wants me at the Chicago presentation," she replied, checking her reflection. "You know how important this deal is." "I do," David said. "I just didn't know my wife was on his travel payroll." Her eyes met his, steady, emotionless. "You're overthinking again. Don't ruin a good thing with jealousy." He said nothing more. The door closed, and the echo lingered long after the car engine faded down the street. That night, he sat alone on the patio, rain tapping gently on the railings. He thought of every act of kindness he had ever done, every sacrifice, every forgiveness, and wondered if, somewhere along the line, he had taught the world to mistake gentleness for weakness. When Marcus called to say Ryan had just transferred key accounts under his own firm's control, David finally exhaled the truth he'd been running from. "Find me proof," he said quietly. Marcus paused. "Of what?" "Everything," David answered. "Proof of everything she's been doing." For the first time in his life, David Carter's voice held no kindness, only resolve. Marcus didn't sleep for 2 nights. When David asked for proof, he went to work like a soldier on a silent mission. Within a week, he'd found the private investigator, Frank Monroe, a retired Dallas detective known for his discretion. He'd handled cheating spouses, insurance frauds, and corporate espionage. But when David Carter sat across from him, calm and composed, Frank saw something different. "This isn't about catching her," David said quietly. "It's about knowing what I've been living with." Frank nodded. "Then let's find out." Days turned into weeks. Clara continued her polished act. Dinner conversations, soft smiles, school drop-offs. But beneath that facade, she was losing caution. Ryan had grown careless too. Arrogance is always the last stage of deceit. He'd begun using company cards for joint trips, leaving paper trails behind. One rainy Friday afternoon, Frank called. "You might want to sit down, Mr. Carter." He slid a small drive across the table at Carter Innovations' private office. Inside were photos, Clara and Ryan in Chicago, kissing in the hotel lobby, another of them walking hand in hand through the Galleria, a third in Cabo, laughing, holding cocktails under a palm-fringed sunset. The timestamps told their own story. Every conference Clara had attended lined up perfectly. But that wasn't all. Frank had more. Screenshots of encrypted messages, late-night voice recordings, and hotel bookings charged to Ryan's corporate account, all referencing Clara by her company alias. David didn't blink as the evidence played on the monitor. The sound of her laughter with Ryan was like static, soft, sharp, unbearable. He stared at it quietly until Frank said, "I can stop if you—" "No," David interrupted. "Play it all." The final file was an audio clip from a conversation inside Ryan's Dallas condo. Clara's voice, cold and confident. "He's too kind, Ryan. That's why he'll never see it coming. When the merger completes, we'll move everything under your name. I'll make sure he signs whatever's needed. He trusts me blindly." And Ryan's reply, "And when the baby's here, he'll raise it too. The man was born to be a fool." Frank exhaled slowly. "You asked for truth. There it is." David stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. The skyline shimmered with the gold light of evening, mocking him with its calm. He thought of his children, of the nights he'd read them bedtime stories while Clara was away on work. He thought of every kindness, every gift, every forgiveness. When he finally turned around, his voice was steady. "Frank, you said you've seen hundreds of betrayals. How do people recover?" Frank met his eyes. "They don't. They rebuild." That night, David didn't rage, didn't cry. He drove home, kissed his sleeping children, and watched Clara sleep beside her phone. Ryan's name flashing briefly before fading into darkness. He whispered to himself, "You chose this path. Now you'll walk it." The next morning, Clara woke to coffee waiting for her favorite, caramel latte. David smiled faintly and said, "We have a big week ahead." He already knew what he was about to do. By Monday morning, David was back at Carter Innovations. Same suit, same smile, same calm. But inside, everything was different. The moment he'd watched that final video, something in him had died, some gentle part that had believed kindness could save everything. What remained now was a man shaped by silence, discipline, and calculation. He didn't confront Clara immediately. He played along, soft-spoken, patient, as though nothing had changed. She mistook his quiet for submission, unaware that every "I love you" she lied with had already been converted into data, evidence, and strategy. David's first move was invisible. He called Rachel Stein, his company's lead legal counsel, under the pretext of reviewing a merger contract. When she walked into his office, he locked the door and slid a flash drive across the table. "Non-disclosure, sealed file, review privately," he said. Rachel plugged it in, watched 30 seconds of the footage, and looked up, her face pale. "I'll need a week," she said softly. "You have 3 days," David replied. That same evening, he began separating financial channels. He moved company reserves in his secure accounts under board supervision, freezing all payment access that Clara managed. When she called the accounting team later that night, furious that her card wasn't working, David was sitting in his car outside, watching rain hit the windshield like small acts of justice. "Must be a system glitch," he said through the phone, voice calm as ice. "I'll have it checked tomorrow." In truth, nothing was a glitch. Every access she had was being erased, slowly, cleanly. Next came Ryan. David met him 2 days later at the Sterling Club for dinner. The rival greeted him with his usual arrogance, shaking hands like a man who believed he had already won. "To partnerships," Ryan said, raising his glass. David smiled faintly. "To partnerships." As they ate, David steered the conversation toward numbers, letting Ryan's ego unravel. "I noticed Blake Dynamics is acquiring new infrastructure in Houston," David said. "You're expanding fast." "I admire that," Ryan chuckled. "Speed is everything in this market. You should try it sometime." David nodded. "Maybe I will." That night, Rachel filed 3 legal motions: an asset protection injunction, a non-compete enforcement, and a quiet financial audit on Blake Dynamics, each signed by David Carter. None mentioned Clara, yet all 3 had her fingerprints hidden within the paper trail. By the end of the week, the first domino fell. Ryan's firm received a federal audit notice for irregular financial reporting. Clara's name appeared on internal correspondence leaked by an anonymous source. At home, she paced the living room, anxious. "Something's happening to Ryan's company," she said. "He's furious." David looked up from his laptop, his tone neutral. "Maybe that's karma working late," she frowned. "What does that mean?" He smiled gently, stood, and kissed her forehead. "It means the world is finally learning how to balance accounts." Clara laughed uneasily, not realizing she was already standing on the edge of David's first revenge trap. By mid-spring, Dallas buzzed with rumors. Ryan Blake's empire, once hailed as the fastest rising private tech network in Texas, was showing cracks. Investors were pulling back, auditors circling like hawks, and no one could explain how their unmatched financial structure had suddenly become a liability overnight. David knew exactly how. Through carefully timed disclosures and a few well-placed whispers, his legal team had leaked documents exposing double invoicing, offshore transfers, and unauthorized use of merger funds, all filed under Blake Dynamics Executive Operations. Every file was authentic. Every paper trail led to Ryan. What no one knew was that David had guided the sequence like a maestro. Never visible, always precise. At Carter Innovations, Clara tried to mask her panic. The same colleagues who once admired her PR brilliance now whispered as she walked past. Meetings turned cold. Partners canceled calls. The board demanded explanations she couldn't give. One afternoon, she stormed into David's office. "Ryan's company is being audited again," she said, her tone shaking. "Someone's feeding information to the press." David didn't look up from his laptop. "That's unfortunate. Maybe he should have checked his accounting better." She frowned. "Don't you dare pretend you're not involved?" He finally looked up, his calm unsettling. "Involved in what, Clara? Business transparency?" For the first time, she hesitated. Something in his voice made her step back. 2 days later, news broke on Business Insider Texas. Blake Dynamics under federal investigation. Sources cite fraudulent reporting. Conflict of interest with Carter Innovations. Within hours, Ryan's photos, smiling at Gallus beside Clara, flooded the internet. Someone had anonymously uploaded hotel footage from Chicago, showing the two of them arriving hand in hand. Social media devoured it. Hashtags trended. Just corporate affair, just Carter scandal, betrayal at the top. David watched it all from his office, the city skyline reflecting in the glass behind him. He hadn't posted or spoken a word, yet the world was doing his work for him. Ryan called that night, his voice raw. "You think this makes you the winner, Carter? You're playing with fire." David's tone was measured. "Fire doesn't scare a man who's already burned." Clara spent the next week in hiding, turning off her phone, crying behind locked doors. Ryan's investors withdrew. His board voted to remove him as CEO pending investigation. And just like that, the man who'd once mocked David for being too kind to survive in business was on the front page, destroyed by his own arrogance. But David wasn't done. The next morning, Rachel brought him the DNA test results he'd quietly filed weeks earlier. "You were right," she said softly, sliding the envelope across the table. "Noah and Lily, neither share your DNA." David didn't flinch. He simply closed the envelope and placed it inside his briefcase. "Thank you, Rachel. That's the fourth layer." Outside, the world saw a man whose competitor had fallen. Inside, David Carter was already planning his next strike. The courtroom war that would end it all. The courtroom smelled faintly of oak and paper. Clean, professional, unforgiving. Reporters lined the benches, cameras flashing like lightning before a storm. On one side sat Clara and Ryan, their legal team whispering urgently. On the other, David Carter, immaculate in a charcoal suit, his expression unreadable. Judge Eleanor Parks adjusted her glasses. "This court will come to order. Case number 2289C, Carter vs. Carter and Blake Dynamics." The air tightened. For months, Clara had told herself she would win. She believed charm still had power, that David's silence meant defeat. She hadn't realized silence was just the sound of a man sharpening his weapons. Rachel Stein stood first, voice steady and cold. "Your Honor, my client seeks full dissolution of marriage, sole custody of both minors, and damages under corporate fraud and emotional deception statutes." Clara's lawyer scoffed. "Your Honor, this is absurd. Mrs. Carter has been the backbone of Carter Innovations. Mr. Carter's accusations are retaliatory." "Then," Rachel interrupted smoothly, "let's allow the evidence to speak for itself." The projector flickered on. First slide. Financial reports linking Blake Dynamics and Clara Reed Carter's authorization signatures. Second slide. Messages recovered from Ryan's encrypted email. Third, hotel footage. Fourth, audio recordings. Then Rachel handed Judge Parks a sealed envelope. And finally, DNA verification results. Clara's face blanched. Ryan stiffened. The judge opened the envelope slowly. Silence fell like snow. These tests confirmed that the two minors, Noah Carter and Lily Carter, share no genetic relation to the petitioner, Mr. David Carter. A collective gasp filled the room. Reporters' pens froze midair. David didn't move. He sat there, spine straight, hands clasped. Clara turned toward him, voice breaking. "David, please, listen to me. I can explain." He met her eyes for the first time in weeks. "You already did, Clara. The night you told me I'd raise another man's baby." Her lip trembled. "You set me up." "No," he said quietly. "You set yourself up. I just stopped protecting your lies." Ryan slammed his hand on the table. "This is a smear campaign. You're destroying both our reputations." Judge Parks' gavel struck once. "Enough." Rachel continued calmly. "Additionally, Your Honor, here are the records showing fraudulent merger transfers under Mrs. Carter's direction, tied to Mr. Blake's firm." The judge reviewed the evidence in silence. After what felt like eternity, she looked up. "This court finds substantial grounds for Mr. Carter's claims. Custody of both children is awarded to Mr. Carter pending further proceedings. Mr. Blake's assets are hereby frozen until federal review is complete. Mrs. Carter's petition for spousal support is denied." Clara collapsed into her chair, shaking. Ryan stared blankly at the wall, his empire already ash. David stood slowly, nodded once to the judge, and left the courtroom without a word. Outside, cameras flashed again, but this time, they weren't chasing gossip. They were chasing justice. And as David stepped into the sunlight, the calm on his face wasn't triumph. It was peace, the kind that comes after a storm that destroyed everything false. The judgment spread across Dallas faster than wildfire. By noon, news channels looped the footage of Clara and Ryan leaving the courthouse. Faces pale, eyes hollow, their silence louder than any defense. The once admired power couple of Carter Innovations' PR world had become the cautionary tale of the year. CNN Business ran the headline: "Affair, Fraud, and the $120 million Lie. The Carter-Blake Collapse." Talk shows debated it. Twitter mocked it. Investors abandoned Ryan's company overnight. By Friday, Blake Dynamics declared insolvency, its board citing irreversible reputational damage and asset seizure. Clara tried to call David, but her number was blocked. She showed up at the house she once ruled, knocking under the evening rain. Marcus opened the door. "He's not home," he said. "And even if he were, he doesn't live here anymore. This house is under his trust now." She stared at him, trembling. "Please, Marcus, tell him I didn't mean for it to go this far." Marcus's gaze hardened. "You meant every word the night you told him he'd raise another man's child. You just never thought he'd stop being kind." The door shut softly, leaving her under the porch light, alone with the sound of thunder and her own reflection in the rain-puddled marble. Ryan fared worse. The SEC investigation David triggered revealed a decade of mismanaged accounts. Banks froze his credit, partners withdrew, and his name became synonymous with deceit. Even his own attorneys withdrew representation. He tried to sell his penthouse, but the court had already listed it as seized collateral. "David ruined me," he yelled into the empty apartment one night, slamming a whiskey glass against the wall. Clara, sitting on the couch, whispered bitterly, "No, Ryan, we ruined ourselves." Days later, paparazzi caught them arguing outside a pawn shop in Richardson. Ryan demanding cash. Clara begging him to lower his voice. The photo made front-page headlines again. The world that once envied them now laughed. Meanwhile, David rebuilt quietly. He had full custody of Noah and Lily, though the truth about their paternity remained sealed from public record to protect them. To the world, he was simply the man who triumphed with grace. Behind closed doors, he was the man who learned the price of kindness and the value of restraint. At night, he'd stand by the window of his new home in Highland Park, watching his children sleep, the city lights painting their faces. Rachel visited once to finalize the last filings. "It's over," she said gently. "They've lost everything." The court confirmed liquidation. David nodded. "Good, but I'm not done yet." Rachel frowned. "What's left?" He looked out at the skyline, calm, thoughtful, almost sad. "Forgiveness," he said, "the seventh and final layer." Months passed. Summer light warmed Dallas again. But for Clara Reed Carter, warmth had become memory. She now lived in a one-bedroom apartment on the city's edge, selling freelance marketing work online to survive. Ryan was gone, fled to Nevada to escape indictments and debt collectors. They spoke once after the trial. His last words were, "You destroyed me," before hanging up forever. David, meanwhile, rebuilt quietly. Carter Innovations became stronger than before, anchored by a new sustainability division that bore his children's initials, N&L Energy Solutions. He told no one what the letters meant. Marcus handled operations, Rachel oversaw compliance, peace returned, but so did reflection. One Sunday evening, while Noah and Lily played in the backyard, David stood by the sliding door and watched them chase bubbles. They called him Dad with such joy that it hurt. He had considered telling them the truth, yet every time he saw their laughter, he understood something deeper. Fatherhood wasn't biology, it was presence. Later that week, a letter arrived, handwritten, the ink smudged with tears. "David, I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know that I wake every day with regret. You were right about kindness. I mocked it until I lost the only man who ever truly showed it to me. Clara." He read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside their old wedding photograph. Not out of nostalgia, but closure. 3 days later, he drove to see her. She answered the door in silence, thinner now, eyes hollow. "Why are you here?" she asked. "I came to return this." He handed her the deed to the house she once called hers. It was paid off and signed over. She stared at the document, trembling. "Why would you, after everything?" "Because this isn't about you," he said softly. "It's about me. Revenge only ends when mercy begins. I took back everything you used against me. My company, my dignity, my children's future. Now I'm taking back my peace." Tears filled her eyes. "You're stronger than I ever imagined." "No," he replied. "I just stopped letting pain define strength." He turned to leave. Behind him, Clara sank to her knees, clutching the deed like a confession. When he stepped outside, the Dallas air felt lighter, free. That night, David tucked Noah and Lily into bed. Lily whispered, "Daddy, why do you smile more now?" He kissed her forehead. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, the best way to win isn't by fighting, it's by forgiving." The camera of fate could have frozen right there. A father illuminated by the soft glow of a nightlight, 2 children safe in his arms, and a city skyline beyond the window, shimmering with quiet redemption. Outside, the world kept talking about the scandal, the betrayal, the courtroom drama. But for David Carter, the story had already ended. Not in fire, but in peace.